Greetings to all in the love and light of the one infinite creator. My name is Jonathan Tong, and I am facilitator for the Seattle Law of One study group. We can be found on the list of study groups on the LNL research page at llresearch.org. We can also be found on Facebook. We are listed as the Seattle Law of One study group. We meet on Tuesdays from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You don't have to live in Seattle or in the Seattle area to join. We're meeting online, so as long as you are interested and available at that time, we would be delighted to have you sit in with us. All are welcome. Otherwise, today we are blessed again to be joined by Gary Beam and Austin Bridges. Both are on the LNL research team that works with Jim McCarthy and channeling the entity known as Quo. Roughly twice a month, those sessions can be found on the LNL research page in the library tab in their channeling library. Gary has also authored the Law of One concept guide and countless other resources that are of huge value to any students of the Law of One. Those also can be found on the LNL research library link. We are delighted to have you both with us. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm doing well. It's an honor to be asked back to this. We always enjoy it, and it's a beautiful day.
Oh, good. How are you doing, Gary?
Yeah, likewise. Little pre-stage nervousness as usual, but I expect that I'll get into the groove. Honored to be here. Thanks for the container that you hold, Jonathan, and this opportunity that you offer all of us.
It's an honor and a privilege and a joy to be of service to others this way. And so much appreciate the service to others that you give through your time here. And yes, if I understand correctly, you came back from a fairly extended Buddhist retreat just this past week. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, a week and a half ago, I returned home. Yeah.
Wow. And this was a silent retreat? You were in silence for that whole period of time?
Mm-hmm. Noble silence for 10 days. No talking, no speech. No, they discourage eye contact and any sort of nonverbal communication as well. So it's a very silent, very interior experience.
No cell phones, no online presence or anything?
Yeah, they collect your cell phone at the beginning. So which wouldn't be too hard to smuggle one in if you wanted to, but I gave my cell phone up, and yeah, no books, no journals is their stipulation. So they're essentially, it's about the most simple schedule one could live on planet Earth. And it consisted of 3 activities: meditation, rest, and eat. And I should say 4 activities, and meditation again, and 5 activities, meditation again. That's your day.
Can you talk a little bit about the meditation experience? I would imagine that would be pretty different from one's normal little bits and pieces of meditation.
Yeah, is anything specifically you wanted to investigate about it? I just don't want to ramble because it's a lot that lives inside me about it.
Oh, yeah. I'm just trying to imagine if I was in your place, and I'm thinking that would be a really transformative experience. Was it a transformative experience for you? Were there any spiritual ahas or breakthroughs that came through, maybe regarding the Law of One or other, that you're comfortable sharing with us at this time?
Yeah, transformative is a good word. Life-changing is also a good word. It was a long-held dream of mine to do something on this level, and it just seemed exotic and too far off. 10 days in silence, 10 days unplugged completely. I've never been unplugged at that level. And that alone was healing. No social media, no news, no focusing on making words come out of my mouth and being awkward. And, all the energy that's invested into social exchanges, is joyful and necessary as they are. But so you asked about the meditation experience and breakthroughs. And yes, multiple levels. One, on a really basic level, I learned that meditation works. As we all know, I presume everybody here is studying the Confederation material. Everybody knows that it is the #1 most recommended activity from the Confederation, meditation, contemplation, and prayer, that is. They're short on methodology, strong on principles, but they do encourage us and exhort us to meditate all the time. So thanks to their influence and others, I've been meditating for about 20 years, but strictly on faith that it's doing something. That even if the monkey mind is very active and I'm not focused and I'm not consciously entering silence, there are gears turning down in the subconscious mind. And I'm working on my spiritual evolution. This experience was markedly different, however, because I saw very practical and tangible results that can come from dedicated time spent in silence.
That's
And in,
Yeah,
thanks.
thank you so much for sharing. And this may or may not make a difference in your channeling experience. You probably haven't been to a channeling session since then, I'm guessing, but it might make a difference, I think.
I went into the experience with a rather open mind, trying not to have preconceived notions or expectations. Nonetheless, I did have little hopes in the back of my head, and one of which was that I would be able to become a better channeler and to deepen my experience. So no, that, like you indicated, is untested. I haven't channeled yet. Our first channeling, we will meet over Jim's, Austin, me, Trish, Kathy, this coming Wednesday. So I'll get to test it out.
All right. Yes, I certainly understand. No expectations is probably the wisest approach to it, but I, would not be surprised, I guess. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I know we have some questions in the chat window for sure that I want to get to, and I would love to come back to this topic if we have time. Otherwise, I did want to ask Austin a question. There was, I really enjoyed reading the most recent transcript from the March 9 channeling session exactly a month ago today, I believe. And I think it was Austin who asked a wonderful question that I have thought about many times myself, just about the concept of thoughts and prayers and how it has become sort of a cliche, and we have become perhaps a little bit cynical about the effects of thoughts and prayers on any number of situations when they come up. Appreciated the question, and I appreciated Chloe's response. And I was wondering, Austin, do you have any reflections in looking back at this point? If you remember that question, if you remember what Chloe said, do you have any reflections on what came out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciated Kuo's response too. Just to give sort of a brief highlight of what we're talking about, I had formulated a question about the idea of thoughts and prayers, and especially in kind of the material scientific world, there's this idea that thoughts and prayers are kind of a useless thing, that they're kind of denigrated if you offer thoughts and prayers. And I've always felt like there was a little bit of validity to that, because it's a very easy thing to just say we're offering our thoughts and prayers without taking any practical action whenever there's some kind of tragedy or something where action can be taken. To just say thoughts and prayers felt kind of hollow to me. So I was wondering if Kuo had any reflections on that, given that the Confederation talks about the power of thought and the power of prayer, and how do we kind of reconcile this idea of like empty thoughts and prayers versus practical action? So that's where that question came from. And Kuo's response was really good. I would encourage anybody, if they're asking the same question, to go and read Kuo's response. And my general takeaway was that, they reinforced that thoughts and prayers do have, an effect, an unseen effect. And I think that all of us who, read the material probably believe that already, but they talked about how the effect requires a sort of orientation of desire or will to really bring about change. And my personal takeaway is that this personal will or desire to bring about change could manifest as praying, or could manifest as taking practical action in the moment whenever it's needed, or moving to do something to actually change something. So if you're praying but you're not inclined to actually take action, that prayer is probably hollow to begin with, because you're not willing to do something yourself. You just want to say the words. And Kuo didn't word it exactly like that, and it was a much more longer and eloquent response. But that was basically my takeaway, that if you have an orientation where you're willing to take action, then your thoughts and prayers have a certain charge to them that can have an effect on the unseen world. And maybe you don't have the immediate ability to take action. And so then that is having an effect, but it won't really have an effect unless you are the kind of person who's willing to take action and do something when you have the ability to do so.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you for recapping and explaining that for anyone who's watching this who didn't read that session. I really highly recommend reading the whole session. You asked, your group asked a lot of really great questions, things that I've been wondering about for quite a while, and much appreciated responses. And that one in particular, yeah, it reminded me of some other session that I had to go back and look for, where there was a question about the Middle East, about how so many holy people of different world religions have been praying for world peace in the Middle East, and why there's still war going on there in spite of all the thoughts and prayers. And I remember Kuo's response in that case was something maybe similar to this, where they said those thoughts and prayers are having an effect, just not maybe in the way that you might expect, because those thoughts and prayers don't change the behavior of people who are not inclined, who are not open to the love and light of the one infinite creator. But the purpose instead is really just to alert all of those entities on the inner planes and outer planes that there is distress here, and they're calling for help, and to ask for that light from the one infinite creator to do what it does in the world. So yeah, a really good lesson. And I suppose something that applies to what's going on in Ukraine and Russia as well now. Let's see, I would love to go ahead and take a look at the questions in the chat window. Linda, I see you have a question about bellicosity. Would you like to unmute your mic and ask?
Hi guys, how you doing today? Thank you so much for joining us. Before I get into my question about bellicosity, I do want to draw attention, you guys, to my short that says L&L Research. I bought this at one of the homecomings, and on the back it says all is one. I have been asked by members of the meditation group, are these shirts still for sale?
Those shirts in particular, I don't believe we have any left, but there are some similar shirts that you can find through a link on our online store at bringforth.org/store. There's a link to an Etsy page that has similar shirts of similar messages.
Great. Okay, now my question on bellicosity. As you all know, we are currently going through some very transformative experiences. I know that Ra has spoke somewhat disparagingly about the bellicosity of our civilization and said things about how there was slight negative polarization in people such as Ike and FDR and George Patton because of what happened in World War II. Now, when we see in today's world, when someone's free will is being infringed on so violently as is happening in the Ukraine episode, what does Kuo recommend that civilization do in response to what we are seeing? Do we pull back from being bellicose and from supporting a warlike episode, or do we err on the other side of supporting someone's free will?
Gary, do you want to start with that one?
Linda, that's a profound, excellently fashioned question, and it's one of the toughest ones of our density, especially for those who have a sense of the path of love and service to others. And in fact, this is a topic that we have explored twice now recently. We dedicated a whole channeling to the question of bellicosity, and then asked a follow-up in another session. And I haven't had the opportunity to read either one. I wish I would have. Hopefully it's fresher in Austin's memory and he can more accurately represent Quo's perspective. My minimal understanding of bellicosity, and let me take a step back and use this moment as a opportune time to make a disclaimer. And that's that, like, Austin and I don't perceive that on the vertical path we are up a rung or more than any of you. Where we are unique, of course, is in our experience with LL research, our long-term intense study of the law of one. So that's why we're being asked questions, but not because we have unique answers per se. I think could all learn from one another regarding study of the law of one and spiritual evolution in general. Bellicosity. Ra does say that bellicosity, that the orientation of bellicosity assumed for any reason, I'm pretty sure they say any reason, will polarize one negatively. So how does that apply to situations such as you describe, when positively oriented entities have a necessity to defend themselves against negative encroachment, lest they surrender their bodies, their lives, their freedoms, their liberties to that negative encroachment? Ra does seem to indicate that this battle between STS and STO energies, between light and dark, if you will, continues even beyond our third density plane into fourth density. The negatively oriented social memory complexes of the Orion group, or whoever they may be across the universe, seek to infringe upon the free will of the positively oriented sources. And the positively oriented sources, wanting to continue their own evolutionary journey of service to others and not be under the heel of the negative forces, must say no thank you and not accept that infringement. They must be defensive in some regard. What that defense entails, I'm not sure. Ra seems to indicate that they engage in what Ra calls a thought war. And there's something of a stalemate in this thought war, like neither side can win, so to speak, whatever win would be defined as. But do these positively oriented entities engage in bellicosity in their defense? What is bellicosity? I think there's a limited amount we can extrapolate, because the fourth density is a completely different paradigm than the one we experience. However, certainly there's something to glean there. I don't know if I'm correct in this, but I tend to see bellicosity as an attitude which sees the other self as, which strips the other self of their creatorhood, and feels that it is righteous to violently defeat and conquer and harm the other self. Can defensive action be taken without bellicosity? I'm not sure. Can you pick up a weapon and shoot somebody knowing that that other self is the creator, knowing ultimately that they are not your enemy? Their enemy status is just a role that they're playing temporarily at the moment in this illusion. You must resist their encroachment, but otherwise wish them no harm as you shoot them, you know? I don't know what the balance there is between defensive action and bellicosity, and it is a tough one for me, particularly considering Ra's categorical insistence that bellicosity is to polarize negatively. But it would seem par for the course. It would seem part of the structure of our density that if we are to have a mixed world with especially a warlike world where humanity tends to prefer guns and weapons as means of solving our problems, or as a means of pursuing the service to self path, defensive action is necessary on some level. And I haven't arrived at a final balance as to how it applies. Were I in Ukraine right now, despite my lofty understanding of the law of one, I would be resisting the Russian invasion, no doubt. And I, of course, would be grappling with the moral and ethical implications of fighting my brothers and sisters and causing physical harm. But I don't know, Gandhi had a very different take. And I think he's worth considering if one really wants to make study of bellicosity. He felt that organized nonviolent resistance could do the job that violence does. And he had a term for that he called satyagraha, which, don't quote me on this, but means some kind of love force, soul force that is strong and disciplined and focused and willing to sacrifice the self, even not for the purpose of defeating the enemy precisely, but for the purpose of redeeming them, redeeming the aggressor through nonviolent action while redeeming the self. So I don't know if I've offered any insight, but I'm interested to hear Austin's take. Or sorry, back to you, Jonathan.
I just wanted to highlight the difference between, well, everyone has a different situation, different context to be in. And I think being actual in combat, being in the armed services would be different from a civilian in terms of how much one may or may not support bellicosity there.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is a point well taken. Austin, would you like to share any reflections on this?
Yeah, sure. I have read Kuo's responses a couple times recently, so I have a pretty fresh take on what they said. A personal reflection that I get kind of from Kuo's responses is that in this particular manifestation of third density, I think that we are kind of put into an impossible position. There are instances where, people have the ability to enact violence upon us or people we love, and the only way to stop them in the moment is through violence. And Gary was asking, is it possible to be violent and still see another person as the creator? I think that the environment that we're in just kind of forces us to ask an impossible question, and I think that we're not necessarily supposed to have a clean answer for it. Our experience here in a sense is sort of an experiment. The logos that set up our experience on Earth and in the solar system, they set it up in a certain way that has had unintended consequences, including 2 planets blowing themselves up because of bellicosity. So I don't think that we're expected to be perfect beings in every moment, particularly when we witness violence and feel called to respond to it in some way. What Kuo said about bellicosity, particularly what Gary mentioned, we asked, how is it possible, if bellicosity in every single instance polarizes somebody towards the negative? I take Gary's definition of bellicosity as well, that bellicosity requires you to see separation. It requires you to remove the creatorhood from somebody else and to enact some kind of violence based on a lower drive, some sort of primal drive in the lower energy centers, that I think is a very understandable and natural thing in war. It makes me think about an instance I saw. I can't remember the conflict or the time period, but it was a reporter that was embedded with a military unit, and they were flying in a helicopter and they were being shot at from the ground, and they let the reporter fire back at the people who were shooting at them with their gun. And the reporter's response was, there's nothing I've ever felt quite as good as shooting back at somebody who is shooting at me. And so, that feeling, I understand, is probably a negative polarization. That invigoration of, feeling like the violence and returning violence is empowering. And Kuo's response to that sort of question of, is there a positive way to interact with bellicosity, is that it's a natural thing to feel like that in a moment of violence, that it's a natural response to want to defend yourself and to see somebody that's attacking you as less than the creator, because that's our primal reaction. But the positive way to interact with that is sort of a longer view. In the moment, it might polarize you towards the negative if you really engage with that feeling, but the positive entity will always reflect on how they're feeling and how they have reacted to things, and will be looking to how they can use that experience to deepen their connection to their heart and to deepen their perception of the creation as being all one and all the creator. And while it might be difficult, after the fact, after you have maybe polarized towards the negative, you can reflect on that and it will actually help you because you have had a deeper experience of really challenging your belief that all is one. Now you can reflect on it later and see that this person who attacked you or attacked somebody you loved is also one. And that's like, in my view, probably the biggest challenge that we're facing in third density right now is people who do things like that. How do we view them as the creator? I don't think we're expected to figure that out in a particular moment, in a particular lifetime, but it's the attempt to constantly try to see that I think is important.
For sure. I would think that's a big part of where we're at now. I see Morris has something you'd like to share, and I think Sue Wen had a follow-up question or comment too.
Yeah, I do want to comment on it because I had this conversation with Don years ago. Don was in the military for a while, and we talked about what role a soldier has. And he says a soldier has a duty. He has a duty to defend and in some cases fight with those in his squad or his team or his platoon. And he says in a case like that, you are in a war setting, you have incarnated into this experience. And he was describing for himself, if I'm in that situation and I'm fighting another self on the other side, I will shoot him and try to kill him. I am not trying to hate him. I'm not hating him. I am filling my role in this incarnation. I am defending my squad or team or country or whatever it is. And this incarnation is a time of action. So I don't hate the man I am shooting, but I have chosen to enter this density and live a life where I am a soldier. And as a soldier, I have a duty, and it is proper to perform that duty, but just not to do it with hate.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Morris, for folks who don't know, is vice president of LNL Research and has been for the last 40 plus years, and was old friends with Don and Carla and Jim for a long time. So appreciate that personal bit of history. I did not know about that about Don. Appreciate hearing. Sue Wen, I think you had a comment a while ago. You had your hand raised, and I didn't want to come back to you. Was there something you wanted to say about bellicosity, Sue Wen?
Yeah. I want to make a comment, but Morris almost kind of answered my question or comment. I don't know if everybody knows another good spiritual book, Bhagavad Gita, that is story of describe a story of the, is a conversation between Arjuna, is that the name, and the I forgot the name, the Krishna. Yeah, basically the premise of the story is he went into the battle, he charged into the middle of the battlefield, but he realized he's fighting his brothers and family, and he said, "What's the point of this battle? Why should I fight?" And the whole story is a conversation. Krishna tell him why he should go into the battle. I think Morris explained very well. I agree with that. But after I read that book, I agree with everything he said, but still don't understand why he should fight. So for me, I can agree with Ross' point of view, but I understand sometimes it's hard to accept. But I think if you are put in a situation you have to fight, yeah, like Morris said, then you fight without, just realize this is the experience you have to go through, but without having to hate the people you're fighting.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Thank you. Gary, there was something you wanted to respond to?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple quick points to add. One is that Don did ask Ra a question about defensive action on the positively polarized entity's part. Ra, if I recall, did not explicate their answer so much, but they did make a reference to Jesus for the student of positive evolution to consider, because Jesus had a moment, where he could have resisted on some level. So there's that. And then I really appreciate Morris's reply. Thank you, Morris. And Linda, in her question, mentioned a few historical figures as having polarized negatively by participation in war, including Ike, that being Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces for World War II, and FDR.
Patton and FDR.
Patton and FDR. Yeah, Patton's a more clear-cut case. And I agree with you. I don't recall, however, Rod describing the FDR or Eisenhower polarizing negatively because of their participation in war. They did indicate that FDR, due to Orange Ray sort of negative lust for competition and power games in that way, did run up against one of his pre-incarnational guidelines that caused the polio crippling limitation. But it's also very salient that you note those historical figures, because in the course of the 106 sessions of the Ra context, there are a handful of instances where an historical figure is brought into the light in some kind of spiritual context. And Ra names several who very much participated in war on one level or another, and identified them as positively oriented beings. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, Abraham Lincoln, and Thomas Jefferson. Ra named all four as positively oriented beings, and Patton. Patton was slightly separated from the other four in terms of how Ra described them. 5 beings who they said are service to others at heart, essentially, who nevertheless had to, due to the circumstances of the world, participate in war. So there's also something that might be extrapolated from there. And thanks, Jonathan, for giving me the chance to add that.
Yeah, no, appreciate all the discussion and comments on that. And it's
Thank you, guys.
Something that's.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for the question, Linda. Did you have other follow-up on that, Linda? Yeah, good. No, I appreciate the long discussion. I know right now with the situation in Ukraine, this is something that is much on everyone's mind, for sure. I did want to go back to the chat window because I do see some other folks who've been waiting to ask questions. And Josh, I saw you had a couple questions there. I think we have time if you'd like to ask at least one, if not both of those. Do you want to unmute your mic and ask?
Thank you, Jonathan, and good to see you, Gary and Austin. Quick question or two. I'd asked Jim last time, and he said no to both of these. But are either of you familiar with the Ascended Master Saint Germain and his "I Am Violet Fire" teachings? You come across that material?
Sorry, not me, Austin.
I read a little bit a long time ago, but it wasn't the kind of thing that stuck with me.
Thank you. And I recently read a book I was curious if you're familiar with, called Children of the Law of One by John Pinion.
Is that connected to Casey's readings?
They sort of, yeah. Casey had predicted someone by that name around that time would write something significant. I don't know the exact quote, but yeah, somewhat connected.
I also vaguely recall that in Casey's recounting of the history of Atlantis, that basically 2 groups emerged as we would see them: service to others or service to self, and they may have used that terminology to describe themselves, one or both of the groups, children of the law of one. But otherwise, yeah, that's about the extent of my familiarity. I'm sorry.
Yeah, same for me. Heard the name and the Children of the Law of One through Casey's readings, but not familiar with the specific work.
Thank you very much.
Parsa, I saw you had a couple questions to ask about channeling. Would you like to unmute your mic and ask?
Thank you, Gary, Austin, for doing this Q&A. I'll just ask my first question. I was wondering, you guys set up the new channeling circle. How's that going? if you can, if it's beneficial to answer that question.
Austin, I went first on the last one.
Yeah, sure. It's going really well. We basically have had what we're calling an intermediate channeling circle for a few years now that you might be familiar with. And then more recently, we started an additional week every month. We were meeting twice a week, and now we're meeting 3 times a week. Right now, it's just been at Gary's house and doing an additional circle that we're calling the CC channeling circle, sort of to break away from the environment in Jim's home, which is a very like safe spiritual environment, and kind of to spread our wings and see how we do in other circumstances and stuff like that. And I think it's going very well. We've only had 2 so far, but the energy feels great. It feels very good. And I think both of the channelings that we've had have been pretty decent, at least in my reading.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that part of Austin mentioned spreading our wings, and part of that is to see what more we can discover about channeling. I mean, we have, from our limited, humble, subjective perspective, the best channeler in the world to have learned from, that being Carla, who's kind of our gold standard, if you will, that we aspire to emulate in a way. However, and Carla innovated practices that have come to define and shape what is LL Research style channeling, particularly challenging and tuning. That was her innovation, her discovery, and is part of our practice now. However, LL Research doesn't know everything there is to know about channeling. It's still a mysterious art form with so much more to explore. So we want to know more about how channeling works, what its limitations are, what is the dance between the source and the conscious instrument? How does that interplay work? And what more can we do with channeling to penetrate the unknown? To get particularly tantalizing is to move beyond the limitations of the conscious mind of the instrument. Like that's what entices and calls me forward. So we want to use it as a more investigatory tool, which isn't to say there's a lot of new to be unearthed necessarily, because the Confederation has the same set of principles to share in infinitely repackaged creative ways. Their message now would be much the same as it was 10,000 years ago. Their metaphors would be different, because 10,000 years ago, they couldn't refer to cars, planes, and internet, of course, but it's the same eternal set of spiritual principles. However, we live in an infinite universe with infinite knowledge as well. And there's so much more to learn about the human condition and about the cosmology of the law of one. So yeah, the spreading of the wings.
That sounds awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marcel, you had a good follow-up question, I think, to go along with that. I would love to have you ask that question.
I'll ask it.
Your responses.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's based on somewhere in the old transcripts. I don't know who it was. I don't know who it was. I don't think it was Carla, but it might have been. They were talking about how the energy of one of the entities felt to them, and I think they said Latwi was cute or something along those lines. And I don't think, like, do you have a sense of what Quo's energy is, if that even makes sense?
Yeah, I experienced Latwi as sexy. And,
Really?
and Hatan is warm and fuzzy.
That's kind of way. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. I am on the subtle sense level insensitive and don't pick up that subtlety like, say, Carla would. She had a more keen, acute sense for the different vibrational feel of entities. Austin, do you feel?
What I would describe as what I feel always going into a channeling session. I feel nervous. It's a difficult thing to like have words come out of your mouth that you don't know what they're going to be.
Mhm.
Very nerve-wracking. So going into a channeling session, I feel nervous, and then once I make a connection and begin the channeling, there's a very stabilizing energy that comes with when I greet Quo and they greet me back, and also just a very like familial, something like familiar and very like warm and welcoming, and like very warm connection that I feel at the moment of making contact.
Yeah, I'd add real quick, didn't quite make that conscious until you said it, Austin. But yeah, there's a sense of yeah, little like security, and I love that word that you used, familial.
Familial, yeah, like
Yeah.
Quo would definitely be like giving you a hug if they saw you.
That is so beautiful. That is really, really wonderful. Yeah, cannot quite grasp that myself. Parsa, I really appreciated the question. Did you have any follow-ups to that?
Not particular. That's very interesting. Thanks.
I'm curious from both of you, as far as I think you both started channeling back in 2016, 17, if I remember. So in the time since you've begun, have you got a different sense of your relationship with Quo, or has your that familiar sense or feeling, or the vibrational sense, has it changed much in that time?
I would say it has at least a little bit. Kuo one time used an analogy of the relationship between the instrument and the channeler as dance partners. And so if you imagine like dancing with somebody for the first time, you're going to like step on each other's toes. You won't understand the flow. You won't know like where they're going next, and you can't predict what they're doing. And then as time goes on, they become familiar with you, you become familiar with them, and you can kind of settle into the flow a little bit more. So I definitely feel like I have experienced that and gotten a little better at getting into the groove of connecting with Kuo. And like Kuo, part of the reason for saying that is because it's also an art for them. They don't know immediately how to interact with instruments until they have some experience, and then it's sort of a combined thing that they're participating and learning from as well.
Thanks so much for saying that, Austin. What I love about that is that it takes channeling out of the realm of some mechanical process. Like they're just pressing the send beam button, beam transmits, and the human is just a radio that receives and relays some pre-packaged exact message. Instead, it's art, it's flow, it's like you said, dance. And in terms of my own experience, I would say that I've seen change in my own confidence and sense of ability. I'm moving away from arriving at the moment feeling less like a noob and more like I'm a partner that is showing up in my own way with something to offer, in a way. And by something to offer, I don't mean like for my own thought processes per se, but I'm more stably able to hold that container so that Quo can transmit what they have to say in response.
That makes sense. Thank you. I see Shayla had a follow-up question. Shayla, would you like to unmute your mic and ask?
Hi, hello to all of you. Thank you for being here. So I'm sure that you've already before had contact with your higher self or guides, or and kind of could get message from them. So what would be difference between in connection, or can you distinguish a difference in connection of getting messages from higher self, for example, or from Quo? If you have had that practice.
Austin, you have actually had this practice.
Yeah, channeling my higher self has been a spiritual practice for me basically from the very early stages of my awakening. And that includes like vocally channeling. Going into learning about channeling with Jim and Steve back when we started, I wanted to approach it from like an empty mind, an empty cup sort of orientation. So I tried to like leave all of my experience behind and learn anew. So the methodology of channeling my higher self is different from going through the process of channeling Kuo. There's a very specific process that we go through with the channeling circle that includes, meeting together, going through our round robin and connecting, basically tuning, and then doing our own tuning processes, and then challenging. And all of that puts me into a very specific state, essentially. And that's what it's intended to do, is it's all of that sort of ritual is intended to put you into a very intentional state. And then that then changes what I feel when I actually channel. It's much more of a, I would say, I'm a lot more stable and blank, and able to perceive something else coming through as unique outside of me. When I channel my higher self, I just kind of get into a flow, and I can recognize it's my higher self just because I have so much familiarity with it. But it's not so intentional. It's not so unique to the setting and everything like that.
I have little of value to add to what Austin will say, but what I will say may be of help to a Law of One reader, because they may have the conception that, oh, these guys at LL Research must be like so spiritually in tune, they're receiving guidance. And I can dispel that by saying I don't, at least in terms of like pitching a question and sitting down to do automatic writing or clearing my mind to receive an answer. I almost never receive anything that I would say, aha, that came from somewhere else. I should modify that. Anyway, I don't feel like I get clear, direct answers right away to my questions. However, I have total faith that I am regularly guided by the higher self or discarnate teachers and guides by way of the thoughts that arise in my head, by way of the many times I've been inspired, by way of the synchronicities that have emerged and the connections. I think that's all a lot of unseen support behind the scenes. It just doesn't tend to register in my mind like it does very validly with a lot of other people, where they feel that there's a sense of conversation with something external to themselves.
Did you have any follow-up questions to that, Shayla?
No, I'm good, but thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, help does and guidance does come in very different methods and shapes. Yeah.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I forgot to do my customary thanking
Don't
of
you
Shayla
dare.
for her coming Serbian translation. Gotta
This
keep
is
her
my
motivated.
last session. This is my last session that I'm here, just so you know.
I
But
will
thank you.
find you an email.
I hope it's not your last session, Shayla. Yeah.
Well, if he continues to do that, certainly. But thank
Okay,
you
I'll give you a break
for the next session. Thank you.
for the next.
Yes, learning how to take compliments is a lifelong challenge for so many of us. And yes, Gary, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, it's probably easy in this celebrity kind of culture to look at people who serve as channels as some sort of special spiritual enlightened beings and such. So appreciate the humility and honesty. I think I had one follow-up question along those lines, and we do have about 15 minutes left, and I know Ragnar had a question that he wanted to ask, and I wanted to encourage anyone still on the Zoom call, if you still have a question that you'd like to ask, to go ahead, put it in the chat window. Otherwise, yeah, about the channeling process, I was wondering, when you are channeling Quo, whether I'm trying to remember the exact phrase that's been used in other sessions, but does it come through in concept clusters? Do you get like balls of ideas that you kind of unravel yourself and then put into your own words, or are you getting it one word or two words at a time? How exactly does that work, if that can be expressed that way?
It's unique to each instrument, depending upon their sensibilities and wiring and sensitivities and so forth. Carla felt something close to what you're describing, Jonathan, that there was a sort of concept ball that she had to unpack, unravel, and translate, and how whatever amount of that ball she was able to transmit, she always felt there was so much more. And I could relate to that too. I think all channels can. The more you channel, it's as if there's and really, this is a part of what I would like to understand about the relationship between the instrument and the channel, because it seems like the focus of the instrument, where the instrument is aiming its attention in this, you could call it a concept ball, or this field of information, if you will, where the instrument aims its focus seems to determine what begins to unfold. Like if, almost like a zooming in, like if you're looking at a picture and you choose to zoom in on that spot, then that spot will get larger and that spot will get larger the more you look at that spot, whereas the rest of the picture kind of falls out of focus. Sort of like a choose your own adventure through a book. You choose to go to page 5 instead of 7, however it works. And then you're going to get that line of adventuring. So I don't necessarily have the sense of a concept ball, but I do, to me, it's more like your latter option, whereby it's just one word after the next, But as those words are unfolding, it feels as if there's choice points. Like you can go left or right or middle or et cetera. And you kind of lean in one direction and then more information unfolds in that direction. And you lean again and more information unfolds in that direction. I guess that would kind of sum it up.
Do you feel like they send you visuals or images ever?
Vaguely for me. Other instruments in the group, particularly Trish, will often describe receiving a visual, and then that serves as a sort of platform to begin exploring what the visual is intending to convey.
Yeah. Wow. How about you, Austin?
Yeah, very similar to what Gary said. I don't know if you remember, Gary, you actually asked Kuo one time about, leaving stuff behind and channeling, and
yeah,
their response was very similar to what you were saying, but they used the example of a fractal image. So if anybody's familiar with like how you can zoom in on a fractal and then that opens up to another like infinite spiral of fractals, but you're leaving behind all these other fractals. And they said that that's sort of like what the process of channeling is like the way that they're able to share information and sort of share this field with us. There's a fractal nature to it, to where you can zoom in at any point and open up an entire new infinite possibility of where you can go. So it's natural for any instrument to feel like there's lots that got left behind, because you're sort of, like Gary said, choosing your own adventure in that. For me, it is very similar to Carla. I think a big challenge for an instrument is the feeling that you need to leave yourself behind as much as possible, that you need to turn off your own conscious processes so that what is coming through is as clear as possible and doesn't have so much influence on you or from you. And I think that it's part of the way that I deal with that is, when we are tuning and if we have a question beforehand, or if a question comes to my mind and I'm thinking about it, I try to just hold on to the beginning aspect of that and treat that as like the string that then Kuo can start pulling. So like if to stop myself from thinking of an answer to the question myself, I'll just think of like the first couple words to a sentence or the first sentence that might come out, and then Kuo can use that as the string that like we pull together to like start unraveling this ball of concept that Gary was describing. And it's very much I think Carla's description is like a concept ball is definitely, I can perceive this thing, this whole field available, that it's up to me and Kuo to kind of like unravel that together.
I can see how the dance metaphor kind of works as well, since you're kind of blending vibrations, blending energies, and responding in kind. Thank you both for sharing that. That's so beautiful to hear and to try to imagine something like that happening. And I'm sorry, I got to ask one more question about this, because I remember reading recently some session a long time ago where apparently Quo admitted that their name came from Latin, although they chose to add the apostrophe to it. They chose the sound complex Quo as a name. And when I looked up the Latin translation of Quo, it was translated as where. Just look at Quo by itself. or if you look at quid pro quo, a common term we hear these days in politics, it just means something for something. Do you have any sense of what the meaning of that name might be, why that was chosen? If the Latin translations had anything to do with the vibrational nature of this entity?
I actually have no clue. That would actually be a good question for Quo. We should write that down. No clue why they would choose that. And
I got a thing about names. So
yeah, they also often say that we're the principal known to you as Quo. They define themselves as the principal, and we've never asked why they do that either. So both of those are kind of mysteries to us. I haven't actually given it much thought.
There is a piece, Quo first appeared in 86. And since then, it's become the predominant source that research channels from 86 until she finished channeling in 2011. That's principally who Carla channeled. I recall something about Carla and Jim feeling that the name Quo was some kind of hint to them that they should ask who Quo is. And I thought Carla understood the name Quo to be to mean who. Might Morris or Linda or Austin or anybody else, do you recall that? Does that ring a bell? No. Okay, could be making that up, but I am accurate in remembering that Carla and Jim kind of understood it as some kind of signal to eventually ask Quo who they are. It may have been a year or two later, and they do ask the question. Then Quo says, "We are a blending of Ra, Hatan, and Latwii, with Latwii serving as the spokesperson for the group."
That's fascinating. Yeah, but you don't get a sense of distinct, separate entities in there. You get the sense of one cohesive entity that you are communicating with.
Yes.
Fascinating. Wow, I could go on with this for another hour, but I know Ragnar had a question a long time ago that I think he might still want to ask about on a different subject. Ragnar, if you're
I would
there,
say go ahead. This one's more interesting than mine. So if you wanna, if you wanna keep going, go for it.
are you sure? Because we are kind of approaching the end of our hour, and if you want to ask your question at all in the session, this would probably be a good time to do it.
I'll shoot it out real quick. So good to see everybody, by the way, also too, always great to see everybody. Reading raw material, I found it notable how much it said about crystals. Ra speaks at length about their potential, both for healing and even for like weaponry and stuff, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, like healing crystals, it's like a concept I used to relegate strictly to the realm of placebo. I figured people just thought they looked cool and it got carried away with all the other things that are attributed to them. But I got the more of Ra's words I read, the more I'm compelled to revisit these assumptions. So I'm kind of wondering if you all have any experience leveraging crystals in your spiritual development to any tangible benefit.
In a different lifetime, I would really enjoy undertaking the discipline of the study and practice of crystals, which, as according to Ra, requires first and foremost the crystallized entity in order to work with the crystal. Yeah, like without Ra, like you, I would have similar assumptions, Ragnar. But Ra is such a credible and helpful source in my view that I have a great sense of faith in what they say about the potentials of crystals to bring through trans-dimensional energy and be used, like you said, for healing or other less helpful, less positively oriented sources. So anyway, I guess the answer for me is no, but I would love to, and with more space and time.
Austin?
Similar answer. I have never felt necessarily called to explore it. So like you said, my knowledge is limited to what Ross said, but we also have people who've come through the channeling circle, just people that we know who are much more attuned to crystals and who use them for like pretty intense spiritual work and healing work and stuff like that.
Any follow-ups, Ragnar?
I guess not. I just might be too easy to just, wear a crystal on a pendant and hope that it helps. I guess couldn't hurt, you know?
Yeah, like many things, I'm sure there's sorry, Jonathan, shallow and undisciplined uses of powerful technologies.
Yes, and if I remember right, Atlantis would be a cautionary tale on the misuse of crystals for service to self or negative purposes or whatever. I've read a number of sessions from Quo where they talked about it for positive uses, and so searching the LNL channeling library on those, I believe, would be helpful. And if I remember right, this would be a good time to mention that, yes, it looks like there is some sort of beta search engine in development for the LNL website. Gary or Austin, would you care to share anything about that? Is that okay to talk about at this point? Still in development.
Want to take it up, Austin?
Yeah, absolutely. You may know we launched a new website a few months ago. It was a revolutionary step for LL research, and it's going to be a work in progress probably for indefinitely. And the biggest new thing to come up after its initial launch is going to be a search engine that our web dev, Daniel Shields, who is incredibly talented and has offered his service for a long time freely to LL research, and now he finally accepted payment for his incredible skilled work. He is almost done, very, very close to finishing up a web search or search engine for the website that will allow you to search all of the material, including the Law of One and the conscious channeling sessions, Quo, Latwii, Hatan, all those, along with everything else like speeches and presentations, even news items and stuff like that. And we had a beta test recently. It's essentially bug free. There's only a few more minor tweaks to make before we can, fingers crossed, go live. I won't say a time period because I know that's a curse, but it'll be very soon. No, don't say it.
I said it. One day I'll learn my lesson.
We'll edit it out, don't worry.
Thanks.
No, it's a beautiful piece of work. Having tried it out myself, I can tell you that, yes, if you just typed in crystals, for example, you could find not only all the mentions in the raw material, but in all the 1,600 plus Quo sessions everywhere where that word was used. And when you click on the links, you can find in the transcript in red where those words or phrases appears. It's a wonderful, incredibly beautiful tool for learning for all students. Looking forward to it when it comes. So thank you so much to Daniel, and blessings to you for doing that.
Thank you.
We are about at the end of our hour, so this is where I would ask Austin, Gary, do either of you have any last closing thoughts or anything you wanted to share before we part ways for this time?
Only reflecting gratitude for you and the whole group, Jonathan, just for holding this space and for inviting us to be here. It's a great honor to be here and answer questions, and always feel really good energy doing this, and just love for you all.
Yes, and if you have the opportunity, take up a meditation retreat. It's set me on a new path. I took a lot of what was intellectual understanding into experiential, direct experience, and I hope I get to do one every year. Anyway, also from LL Research, we are resuming holding events this year. Finally, it's been a few years as a regular vital service that LL Research has offered. It's been on hold through the pandemic. So in a couple of weeks, we are going, less than 2 weeks, we're going to publicly open and announce the Coming Home to a New Earth gathering outside of Asheville, North Carolina. If you want to be apprised of when that registration opens, subscribe to the Gatherings newsletter. It's available through llresearch.org, and you'll find out the moment that registration opens. We are anticipating that seats are going to fill up quickly. As I mentioned, it's been a few years, and we're also got in the works a potential other couple in-person gatherings this year, likely one in Prague and likely a homecoming in Louisville as well. Shayla, I see that you're already committing to be there. at the Prague event. That sounds awesome. They're not too far from you.
Very much looking forward to Prague. Never been there, but yeah, guys, you're welcome.
And
So excited.
look forward to meeting you there if this all works out. Vojta, the Czech translator, has stayed with Trish and me the past week. Actually, he and his partner Emily, Morris and Linda. I have an amazing story for you guys there. And they just left this morning. It's been awesome spending time with them. So Vojta has been our partner in planning the Prague event. We had one in 2019. It was supposed to be an annual event, but then again, the pandemic. And final note about events is that we brought on an event manager into research, and her through her leadership, we're going to aim to host more in-person and online events. It is a vital service that LL Research can be offering the community. And then finally, thank you so much to everyone. I've learned as much about the law of one from my own study as I have from other people's. It's a constant teach, learn, teach cycle. So thank you all so much for giving us this space to talk about the law of one. And to Jonathan especially.
Of course. Thank you both so much for everything you have done and continue to do in service to others. Thanks to all our brothers and sisters at L&L Research for all they do. So yeah, blessings to all who joined us on the Zoomcast. Thank you for being here. Blessings to all who are watching this on YouTube at some other time or space. And look forward to seeing you all sometime in the not too distant future. Until then, in the love and light of the one infinite creator, Adonai. Namaste.
Namaste. Be blessed.
Love you.
Lots of love.